Approximately 1 out of every 10 adults is dyslexic, and it's estimated that the vast majority of those individuals, which is millions and millions of people, don't actually realize that they're dyslexic. And that's kind of unfortunate because when you're dyslexic, even if you don't know it, it will still impact you. And as humans, when we are struggling with something, like if I'm struggling to learn to read and I look at my peers and I'm like, they're all getting this rather easily, it's really easy to jump to some kind of painful, harmful conclusions, like there must be something wrong with me, I'm not as capable as, or I'm not as intelligent as my peers. And when we jump to those conclusions, it can really negatively impact our sense of self or our level of self-esteem. But when we know that we're dyslexic, it provides us an explanation for why certain things are a struggle for us when they don't appear to be for others. And that is why today we're going to talk a little bit about what dyslexia is, and then also walk through this little self-assessment to help you determine if you might potentially be dyslexic and should maybe consider exploring it further or even getting a formal professional evaluation. So what is dyslexia? Dyslexia is a neurodevelopmental difference, as in a difference in how someone's brain functions that impacts the way that that brain processes language. The parts of the brain that are responsible for fast and efficient processing of written language are in the left hemisphere of the brain. There's the occipitotemporal cortex, which is responsible for recognizing visual patterns of letters and words. There's the temporoparietal cortex, which is responsible for the phonological processing of language, as in the sounds of language. And finally, there's the inferior frontal gyrus, which plays a significant role in mapping out how written language is connected to the sounds of language, which helps us with decoding, i.e. reading language and even knowing how it sounds. And when you compare an fMRI of a dyslexic person reading something to one of a non-dyslexic person reading something, and you look at those three regions of the brain in the dyslexic person, what you'll find is that each of them tend to be underactivated in comparison to the non-dyslexic person. And as a result of that underactivation, dyslexic individuals tend to rely on different parts of our brain for language processing, and the parts that we rely on tend to be less efficient and more effortful. Which is why dyslexic individuals struggle with things like reading, with writing, with spelling, with word retrieval, but also it can even impact our working memory and our executive functioning. So with all that said, how do you know if you're dyslexic? Well, it starts with something like this. The little assessment that we're about to do is 12 questions, and before we even get started, remember that doing this little assessment is not a substitution for getting a professional evaluation. For this assessment, I'm going to ask you 12 questions. And if you answer yes to a few or even several of those questions, then it definitely may be worth looking further into whether or not you might actually be dyslexic. Question 1. When you compare the speed that you read things to the speed that other people read things, do you often find yourself reading a little bit slower or finishing last when there's a group reading assignment? Question 2. Do you struggle with spelling things and often find yourself trying to spell them phonetically, as in based on how they sound, rather than following the rules of spelling? Question 3. When you have to copy something that's written in one place to another place, do you often find yourself making mistakes, leaving things out, or even reversing the order of words? Question 4. When you have to read something to comprehend it, do you find yourself having to read through it multiple times in order to actually comprehend it? Question 5. Do you find yourself frequently experiencing that sensation of, oh, there's the word and it's on the tip of my tongue, but I just can't find it? Question 6. When you encounter an unfamiliar or uncommon word like this one, do you often struggle or hesitate when you're trying to figure out how to pronounce it? And for anybody who might wonder, I believe that word is supposed to be pronounced plotanta. Question 7. Does proofreading your own written work feel very defeating? Because even if you go through it several times, you still miss a lot of mistakes. Question 8. Is keeping track of which way is left and which way is right kind of challenging for you, and do you often have to come up with your own mechanism for reminding yourself, oh yes, this is my left hand because there's a watch and a ring on it? Question 9, and this one is a really important one. Do you have any relatives, like parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, who are dyslexic? Because dyslexia is very heritable, meaning it's passed from one generation onto the next, and so if it's in your family, it makes it a lot more likely that you might be dyslexic. Question 10. Even as an adult, do you still find yourself sometimes struggling with B's and D's and P's and Q's? Question 11. Do you find that it takes you longer than others to figure out and actually do a multi-step process or follow written directions? And the last question, question 12, does your brain struggle or maybe just hesitate when you're trying to manipulate the sounds within words? For example, if I give you the word parked and asked you to replace the k sound with an s, how would that sound? If you were wondering, it should sound something like parsed. And now that we're at the end, I would love to hear down in the comment section how that was for you. Were there a few or maybe even several of those questions that resonated, or did almost none connect? If there were a few or several, it's definitely worth looking into further what dyslexia is and how it might impact you, and maybe even pursuing some formal evaluation. Because if you're dyslexic, knowing that you're dyslexic matters. It can give you a clear understanding of who you are, of why certain things have been a struggle. It can clear up a lot of the confusion that comes from looking at others and looking at yourself and being like, something here is different about me. On top of that, though, it can guide you in figuring out what are supports that might be really helpful for me in my life to make it so that some of these challenges don't impact me so negatively. And it's also worth noting that if you're trying to pursue accommodations in work or in school or just for life in general, having a diagnosis really matters kind of a lot for that. But arguably, the thing that matters most here is that the better you understand your brain, the better you'll be able to work with it instead of against it, especially as you live a life in a world that wasn't exactly designed for maybe the way that your brain functions. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for being here. I'm incredibly grateful for you. I would love for you to leave a comment down below and just let me know how going through this was for you and if you learned anything about yourself or about dyslexia. And on that note, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are, I hope that you have a lovely rest of your day.